YouTube for Friday, and it is my singular pleasure to introduce Mike Jacob. Mike is the Vice President and General Counsel of the organization known as the Pacific Maritime Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. And we met on a live stream, and I'm pleased as punch to have him on here and talk about Oakland Athletics, Howard Terminal, and also the Coliseum and the A's pursuit of Ballpark from a unique perspective you have not heard at all in this way. Mike, let's talk. Tell them first of all about the organization and what it does.
Yeah. So PMSA, we represent ocean carriers, marine terminal operators, maritime interests that do business in Oakland, but also up and down the U.S. West Coast. So we have our headquarters at Jack London Square, but we also have offices in Long Beach and Seattle. And we represent the gamut of maritime interests on the U.S. West Coast for everyone except for tankers. So we don't have any oil tanker members, but we have obviously container ships and bulkers and roll-on, roll-off cargo vessels, and you name it, a panoply of moving things by ship on the U.S. West Coast. One of our members either carries it in a ship or loads it or unloads it off at a terminal. And so obviously we have a lot of interest in making sure that our ports are healthy, they're competitive, and we're reinvesting in our capacity to grow. So our interest, I think, in Oakland is pretty clear, and our interest in maintaining as much opportunity to grow in the future is paramount to our ability to look at what happens in 30, 40, 50 years down the line, primarily because the waterfront is a place where we have very valuable real estate, and it's pretty much a given that it's impossible that we're going to create more deep water in California that can be used for ports. So we're using the land that we have, and every single acre is precious to us. So it sets up a bit of an inevitable conflict with other types of land use from time to time. And that manifests itself in a lot of ways, which you won't be surprised by, because everyone wants to be on the waterfront. It's from an industrial point of view, you want to be there in our business, but other people want to be there too, whether or not it's to enjoy it because you might have the opportunity to live there, or because you're setting up an opportunity for tourism, or you want to maintain the ability to create some environmental mitigation and ecosystem restoration. There's a lot of diverse reasons why you might want to have access to the waterfront, and they're all legitimate. And the role of policymakers is to really decide what goes where, right? And once you start making those investments based on those policy recommendations, we're going to really jealously guard those investments and our opportunity to grow into those investments. So about 10 years ago, we had a very similar situation to the one now in San Diego. It involved that got defeated at the ballot box. There was a move in Seattle a couple of years ago that got defeated through litigation, but to potentially build an expansion arena for the NBA, essentially right next to the complex right now that where the Kingdom used to be, but where the Mariners and the Seahawks play now in their respective stadium. So there's always going to be a conflict with land use, and our goal is to make sure that we preserve what we have and we have a fair shake moving forward with being able to make new investments.
What, given Howard Terminal, how it looks, and let's have a look at it here. I can actually pull it up through the magic of a StreamYard, and we can have a look at the property.
Please do.
There. That's it from one point of view. What's the main issue your organization has with Howard Terminal as it's designed for a ballpark in this instance right now?
Well,
I think Mike is still with us. It's just sometimes there's a little bit of a delay there. And so that depends generally on the internet connection of the person talking. So it will clear. And when it does clear, I'll simply re-ask him the question so that it comes through. And so there he goes. Mike,
sorry about that. Yeah.
I'll re-ask the question. What's the issue with Howard Terminal from the organization standpoint?
Yeah, there's renderings and drawings. I mean, I think at its core, we don't want to see maritime property that's potentially usable in the future go away. We can't recreate it. And you never want to sacrifice that opportunity for something that can be built somewhere else. So a stadium, housing, office space. There are lots of places in the city of Oakland and in the Bay Area at large that you could build those resources, and you could invest in those uses. But more importantly, I think your question, what's special about this property? Well, first of all, it's part of the edge and the fabric of what we do. It is right now. It's a marine terminal that we're not using for ship-to-shore capacity. But if you brought up the Google Maps and you zoomed in on Howard Terminal, you'd see that it's populated by hundreds of trucks and chassis, and there's over 300,000 gate moves a year from trucks that are using that facility right now. So there you go. That's a good one. And that type of staging area is critical for us because it allows us to take trucks out of the community. It allows us to consolidate off-dock yards into a near-dock yard. So you reduce truck VMTs, you reduce congestion, you reduce pollution, and you essentially make the port a better neighbor. And it's part of our buffer zone. The terminal itself and the surrounding area is a critical component of making sure that we're good neighbors, and we don't have a bunch of people that are living immediately next to what we do, having to navigate through trucks or complain about light or noise or air emissions or any of that stuff. And then there's a couple other components about the property we can get into a little bit with respect to opportunities there for us to expand our operations through the turning basin and things like that. But yeah, if you just look at it on a map, it looks like 50 acres of nothing, and it looks pretty attractive. When we look at it, it's a critical component of the ecosystem at the port.
I'm trying to get this to come through, and yeah, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the things that we hear from time to time is like, well, no one's using it.
How's that?
Well, that's not true. We do use it, but
how's that map?
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah. It's just not. We're not using the ship to shore cranes right now. It's not under a master lease. And to be frank, it probably won't be under a master lease for some time. I mean, we don't make decisions about whether or not we keep or give up property based on short-term market swings in our business. We're making investments on, a 30-plus year horizon with our leases and our terms. And one of our newest terminals down in Southern California has a 45-year concession, because the more infrastructure you build in, the longer your payback period has to be. So, we're just not interested in giving away something which has potential future use. So that being said, I think if you ask the people that are in our coalition of labor and truckers, and obviously our members and our customers, you'll hear a whole panoply of concerns about what's going on. And some of it's about the ballpark, some of it's about housing, some of it's about transportation and congestion, and some of it's about the future of the port. You'll hear there's a good confluence of all those different concerns that are out there.
What are your thoughts regarding the A's and their political response? Have they been in contact with you? Have you met with Dave Cavalli as president, or anyone representing the Athletics to this point? Yeah,
thank you for asking that. That's a critical component, as you know, of any development is making sure your development's going to be successful, because you meet with the people that might have a problem with it, but you also sit down and talk to the neighbors, right? And this is our neighborhood, and they're the new kids in town, and they want to move in. I think the fair thing to say is they were a little late bringing us to the table.
Wow.
But be that as it may, back in 2018, we did meet with them a couple of times before they did their reveal, and laid out some baseline concerns that we had with the potential that they were going to build at Howard Terminal. We brought a lot of different industry stakeholders into the room on several occasions, had those conversations. I would, compliment the A's for being gracious and listening, and acknowledging our issues. But I don't think that we ever had the feeling that they were taken seriously. And when we walked away from those conversations, the main response we got from the A's was, those are really important issues, and you should raise them in PIR. When you hear that from a developer, we take that as, those are interesting concerns. You should raise them in public, and if you don't resolve them through the public process, you can go ahead and sue us. That's not reaching out a hand and saying, I understand your problem, let's see if we can solve it, right? The next place that all of those concerns went was obviously to the port. So the port had to renew their exclusive negotiating agreement with the A's last spring, which was in April of 2019. And the port is not in the business of building baseball stadiums, and they know that their revenue bonding is all tied up in the success of our members actually being able to move cargo. So the quote from several of those commissioners was, we're not going to step on our own neck, right? We're going to make sure that you guys are part of the conversation, and we're moving forward, and we're not going to give you the brush off. So we appreciated that, and they formally put that into their agreement through the execution of an addendum to develop some seaport compatibility measures. We can talk about that a little bit like we do. But that was really, we really have that standing because the Port Commission insisted on it, not because the A's as developers followed up on their initial reach out. So, I don't want to, denigrate them for not reaching out. They did. But it was late compared to where they were in their planning. And then for all the listening they did, we didn't really feel that they reached out a hand and said, what can we do to put you in this stadium today, right? And instead the response was, why don't you go raise those concerns through the EIR process? So that's where we're at.
Well, interestingly, I don't hear you talking about a city point person in all this. Where's the city of Oakland?
Yeah, well, good question. The city is in an interesting place in Jack London Square and Howard Terminal. They're in the middle of a long-term, multi-year downtown specific planning process, which used to include the Howard Terminal property. They spun it out of the downtown specific planning process into its own planning process, and that's why it has its own EIR and a different timetable. It seems to be disjointed. So I think it's fair to say that no one's enunciated a clear vision for how they want to redevelop that area west of Broadway and south of 880, contiguous to Howard Terminal, so that whole 3rd Street corridor, in a way that actually reflects the value that it has right now to the port and to the port customers. And the main value there is that it's a buffer zone, but it's also a place where we have ancillary services that provide services to our truckers and to cargo owners. So you're right. I mean, there's no real point person. We appreciate that the mayor has a vision, and she's met with us on several occasions, and we appreciate her time. And she's said that she supports having seaport compatibility talked about and doesn't want to impact our business. So we do appreciate that. But at the same time, there really hasn't been a concerted effort on the part of the city to set up kind of a grand vision for the area or anything like that, just because of the disjointedness between this project, all the downtown specific planning, the lack of a focus on what it is that we do and what we need to be successful.
I know you and I have talked about the legislation that Governor Newsom signed into law last fall, which if the city council gives the green light on, and I understand they're headed toward doing that at some point, would result in a redevelopment area of a type that could produce as much, really more than $1.2 billion in subsidy if the rate of growth is 4% in an area of where the base year assessed value would be $2 billion, just $2 billion, and that would include mostly the ballpark over a 40-year period. Have they talked to you? I know you and I have talked about that off camera, about this very extensive legislation, but have they talked to you about it?
No. And it's a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity. I got to tell you, obviously we have philosophical problems with this project. But at the same time, no one has addressed these practical concerns about how do you sit down and rebuild the infrastructure in a way where what the A's want, which is primarily a stadium, could interact in a way which is effectively, negating a lot of our concerns. And it's one of those things where anything can be done with money, right? The question is do the A's want to pay? And if the A's don't want to pay, does the city have the capacity to pay? And I think you and I have both agreed the only way the city would have the capacity to pay for almost any of this infrastructure is through the application of the tax increment financing that they put together. The uses and the area that they can apply that money to, and the areas and parcels they can raise money from, is frankly better and more expansive than it was under previous redevelopment. The problem is it's not as good on the leverage side, right? Because the tax increment only goes to the city revenue. It doesn't touch schools and the county and all the other stuff that it used to.
Yeah, they have to. So yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, there's a lot of missed opportunity there. And that potentially could be part of an ongoing conversation on seaport compatibility measures. But that whole process has been bogged down, and it's essentially waiting for clearance on the draft EIR. Part of that community benefit agreement process that's going on that the city is working on with the A's has also been delayed due to draft EIR concerns. And all the other panoply of issues that need to be addressed with respect to regulatory approvals for the site. Because as you know, it's not only complicated to build in the Bay Area, it's complicated to build in the Bay Area on the water. And there's a lot of additional steps that need to be worked through. And those only occur after the city has taken some action on an environmental impact report.
Hey, I'm curious, have you all calculated any potential economic loss you would sustain if Howard Terminal were to see itself to completion?
Yeah, so we did do an initial study as part of an alliance of folks that are opposed, and we put it up on our website, the East Oakland Stadium Alliance. Don't know those numbers right off the top of my head, but it is hard. I mean, I think that's an understatement. It's hard to predict exactly what the scope, scale, and timing of the impacts are. And yet at the same time, everyone in the supply chain feels very passionately about the fact that we know there will be impacts and they'll be significant. And that is a problem that we have in terms of both being able to alleviate some of our concerns more concretely when people ask, just as you did, and totally reasonably, like, you know, what can I say this impact is? It's very hard to say. And at the same time, it also makes it hard because you can't quantify it immediately in the short term, what the value of the mitigation should be for the project, right? So that's very challenging. But what we do know is that we're sitting in a very precarious point in time with respect to competitiveness at the port. The Port of Oakland is doing a lot better than a lot of other West Coast ports, and we're happy about that with respect to maintaining market share. But it still hasn't grown as fast as we've all projected, and most importantly, as fast as our members have financed their own leases against. So economics of the port and for folks who might not know is that it is a public agency, but there's no public tax revenue stream that supports either the operations or the investment in the infrastructure of the port. It is a proprietary agency. So it eats what it kills, which means that all the infrastructure has to be based off of revenue. The primary basis for all that revenue bonding are seaport leases. The fundamental value of that lease is tied up in two different components. One of them is a minimum guarantee. So our members essentially have a base level that they're paying to the port every year based on a projection of overall need by the port to guarantee to their underwriters that they can cover a spread on the revenue bond. But the other component is that the volumetric component to it too. And that means that your revenue at the port increases once our volumes have hit a certain level, and then they grow over time, right? So it's essentially an escalator. But if we're underperforming compared to what we contracted for, all the risk is on the marine terminal operator side if you fall below those numbers. So you're covering your minimum guarantee, whether you have losses, whether you're making a profit, whether you're moving a lot of boxes or a few boxes, if it's less than that magic number. So In the long term, the largest terminals in the next 10 years at the Port of Oakland have to be able to hit numbers or renew. If you don't hit, you're not going to renew and up your lease, at least not at the same rate. Part of the challenge is that our infrastructure capacity and our needs and our overhead increase pretty rapidly in California because of a lot of the investment requirements and regulations we have with respect to primarily clean air, but also clean water considerations. And we're really proud of the amount of air quality improvements we've had. If you follow some Port of Oakland announcements about their most recent air quality emission inventories, we're looking at overall emissions reductions in SOx and diesel particulate matter from ships and trucks of over 95%. I mean, it's phenomenal, but it's expensive. Mm-hmm. And the next round of infrastructure that we're looking at is transitioning into near zero emissions and zero emissions equipment. And that also requires some pretty heavy infrastructure changes to make sure that we're investing in the energy capacity that we need to fuel that new equipment or to charge that new equipment. And that's not cheap. So you need to be able to grow.
Out of curiosity, a side question: are you at all looking at the Oakland Global Rail Enterprise low emissions engine that was just introduced last year?
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for and the port and some of the partners, including the folks in the outer harbor there that are working on those projects, are putting together new investments that will help facilitate us to do more cargo. So that project, the new cool ports investment out there to make sure that we're able to export perishables and to really make sure that we're consolidating our export market with agriculture and food products. Those are really important. And some of the near dock housing that's also occurring out there in the outer harbor on former city property as part of the base redevelopment. Those are important considerations and complements to what we do. There's no shortage of opportunity in Oakland, which is one of the reasons why we're fighting so hard. We're protecting our interests now, but we're really focused on protecting our ability to reinvest in Oakland in the future. So what happens, because there's a long answer to your question, right, about where are the impacts. The impacts are 10 years from now. When you go to renegotiate a lease that right now, over a decade, is at the Oakland Inner Harbor, looking at about $1 billion of revenue for the Port of Oakland. Pretty sizable. That's on our existing and conventional technology and equipment. Then what we're looking at starting in 2030 is potentially a new set of state regulatory requirements for an entirely new and California-only cargo handling equipment regime. So it's taking all the equipment that's there and re-energizing it, building all the electrical infrastructure out, making sure we're still plugging in ships at a higher percentage than we do now. I'll bet you most people don't know that the Port of Oakland plugs in and cold irons more ships at berth than any other port in the world. It's pretty fantastic. And that's one of the reasons why the percentage is so high on the reductions in diesel particulate matter and SOx. There's a lot of investment that needs to happen. But to facilitate that, you need to be able to grow. And then we also need to have confidence that we're going to be able to get through our own environmental planning process in 10 years. And that's part of the problem too, right? I mean, if we've got 3,000 new residents downwind of us and close, all of the air quality profiles change. If we have a lot of new traffic, all of our impacts that are going to be measured by EMP for our trucks, they all get worse. If we're looking at any number of potential impacts, none of those get cheaper when you basically created a brand new city right next door to what you do.
I'm reminded, Mike, that in thinking about this and being in the Bay Area as long as I have, and both of us, that there's long been a dream of having a Howard Terminal type ballpark because of what we used to call Pac Ballpark, right? But we all tend to forget, and I tend to forget this until I'm thinking about it from a planning perspective, that area came to be what it is today because of Loma Prieta earthquake. There was no port activity down there, whereas we have a thriving port.
Right.
So we have a conflict that San Francisco never had to deal with. Right.
Yeah. And in part, they made their decision, right, about do they want to grow a commercial port or do they want to grow tourism and access to the waterfront for people, and they chose the latter. And again, there's no right or wrong decision about how you want to plan your waterfront, but you sure as hell better plan for it, and then invest in it and make it successful when you do. So if you've spent as much time and energy as we have in Oakland, creating successful industrial global world-class port, you don't walk away from it. You just don't. I mean, the jobs impacts, the tax impacts, all those things. You just don't do it. And if you are going to, again, you better make a concerted effort about doing it well and doing it right. And so I think from the mayor and the port commissioners and city council members, what we hear when we raise our concerns is that they're sympathetic, but they have not been convinced that these are mutually exclusive propositions, right? That you can't do both. I think our argument is you can do both, and the easiest way to do both is to maintain the same parallel investments that have been in place in Oakland for the last 50 years. You build up East Oakland around the Coliseum and around the Coliseum BART station, and you invest in your industrial infrastructure and capacity at the port. You do those things in parallel, and they can coexist, and Oakland has the benefit of both. But you don't need to create a situation where your trade-offs are mutually exclusive opportunities or zero-sum games, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
What are the next? Let me ask this in a different way. To me, it seems like there's two futures. There's the future you want to see in terms of next steps, and then their next steps. And also, like to your comments on the A's filing the lawsuit recently, a few days ago.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a big picture planning concept that the A's have, and that's to turn Oakland back on the square west of Broadway into south of Market San Francisco. There's no shortage of renderings and drawings about what all that's going to look like, and that's part of that downtown specific planning conversation. Do you want to have up to 30,000 new residents when you include Howard Terminal and the 16-block area outside of it that all look like Folsom Street and Harrison Street in San Francisco? And our vision of that just is that that's not compatible with what we do. And there's a lot of there's a lot of demand for housing, and we get that. But there also needs to be someone who stands up for the industrial base of Oakland's blue collar economy. And that's what we do. That's what the longshoremen are doing. And our coalition is focused on that. And I think it's one of the ironies of what's going on here. I mean, there's no shortage of conversation with Oakland leaders about macro level issues when you talk about things like the minimum wage and the need to close the gap between rich and poor and the income inequality associated with a lot of the turning of our economy to Silicon Valley. You have a lot of folks that get a lot of money really quick, but you leave a lot of the service industry behind. We think that this project represents an acceleration of that in Oakland. And our jobs are some of the best blue-collar unionized jobs in North America. They pay really well, but they also reflect our community. Our local LWU workforce is over 45% African American. And most of those workers are making over $100,000 a year, and they have a skill and a trade. Those skills and those trades jobs, you cannot replicate them anywhere else. Once your port is gone, it is gone. So unless you're planning on creating a whole bunch of new coders, which you probably should do in the broader scheme of things for the Bay Area, there's absolutely nothing wrong with those jobs. But you don't need those jobs to be at Howard Terminal. They don't need to, stand in for blue collar work. The number of truckers that we hire, the number of folks that are then servicing the trucks. You go through the indirect economic impacts of folks that are in real skilled work jobs, everyone from the machinists and the Teamsters on down. I mean, you've got a whole lot of people that are working in this industry. So it's a different vision, which goes back to your point about, if you're going to do this, don't do it on a one-off. Don't do it just because you've got an opportunity to do a great project. You need to plan for it really comprehensively. And that means you got to bring everyone in. And it goes back to your point, I think, about San Francisco. How many years have we all talked about China Basin? The ballpark's not in China Basin.
Right.
How many years have we talked about maybe doing something down on Townsend or whatever? That's not where it is. You got to do a lot of work. You got to put in the groundwork for it, and expecting someone to just kind of turn over the kingdom and then say, yeah, we're going to process your EIR in a year and you're going to be turning dirt in 3. That's not realistic when you have everybody on the same page. And we don't have everyone on the same page. And then maybe that's a good segue into your question about Schnitzer Steel and that litigation too. What a shot off the bow. I think there's a lot that we can say, but the fundamental issue here is that the A's have just sued a marine terminal for operating on the estuary. That's a bit of a declaration of war. And it's an outsized response, we think, to what's really happening on the ground. Just my personal opinion, there are 2 really tough jobs that are being assailed in the lawsuit. One of them is being motorcycled because it's an important job that we have to do if we're going to meet any of our waste goals. And someone has to take that material and essentially scrap it and make it into something new. And there's no way you get rid of cars and refrigerators without having to deal with hazardous waste issues. The even tougher job is being a regulator. You've got to make sure that you're not shutting down that business, but you're still facilitating it happen in a clean and responsible way. And essentially what that lawsuit is a suit against the state of California, alleging they've been delinquent in their duty to effectively regulate the industry. And I'm not an expert in any of that, and I don't have a background in toxics or hazardous waste or anything like that. But there is no chance in hell that if the State Department of Toxic Substance Control has a direction from the legislature to do something that they're not working on. That have they met the timelines that were laid out by the A's in their litigation? No, they haven't. Does that mean that you shut down a facility that's been in place for 50 years? No. And even if you do have a new regulatory structure in place, this is something you know really from your planning background, is non-conforming uses can last forever, unless the state wants to inversely condemn and or eminent domain that property, right? And so, are there solutions to these problems that don't involve that? Of course there are. I don't know what they are, but you certainly don't have to fire a shot across the bow like that with that type of litigation. I mean, I don't know what they're intending to achieve. And then the other head scratcher is the A's have to ask DTSC for approval for the Howard Terminal project. So they're suing the agency, that they have to turn around and say, hey, would you mind giving us a break on this cleanup? That's crazy.
Yes.
Someone smarter than me had come up with a good strategy for this over there. I don't know what it is, and obviously I don't know all the details. But
to me, it just it signals that the mayor is kind of losing control of it, and I think the mayor needs to have a task force to get their hands around this before it goes too far in the wrong directions.
Yeah, I think that's right. I unfortunately saw a tweet from someone, and I don't think it was from her, but I think they're quoting her saying that she supported the lawsuit. I don't know what that means to City Hall in terms of supporting the lawsuit. Do they think they're supporting the A's, or do they think it's connected to the project, or do they just want the state to work on the regulations for these types of facilities? Could be any of those.
Or is it just a wayward tweet by somebody who doesn't know anything?
That's true. Yeah, could be. Yeah. That's true. But I'm pretty sure, don't take me to the bank on this, but I'm pretty sure that Schnitzer is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, industrial taxpayers in the city.
Yes.
They've got a set of really high quality jobs, but they also serve the entire Bay Area with respect to the recycling that they do. And they're one of the largest recyclers in the state. And that's a critical component. And the funny thing about where they are and what they do is that you could not cite that project anywhere else in the Bay Area right now. If you went to all of those communities that have ports and you said, could I get a new scrap metal facility in here that has access to deep water so I could get that recycling material overseas after I scrap it, you would be hard to find a property to do it. We have one in Redwood City, one called Sims Metal at the port there, and deep water access, and we have one in Oakland at Schnitzer. But they're both regional assets. They serve everybody. We are an amazing exporter in the United States of waste. Some of our highest uses for container exports are scrap paper and scrap metal. The Schnitzer facility is part of that supply chain. It's how we facilitate recycling at home and overseas. So one of the things all the Amazon boxes that everyone has, when they all get broken down, they go back to China and they get turned back into cardboard boxes. And so that's a critical component of our supply chain. And it's actually a large amount of export commodity for the state. So I don't know what's in it for the city long term. And certainly, elected officials can say they support certain things and not certain things. Does the city formally get involved in this type of thing? I don't know. I hope not. But they could. There's absolutely nothing that stops them from doing that. It also seems like the A's litigation opens the door to a broader conversation at the state level about how do you want to handle these types of facilities just in general. That's been ongoing, right? The trick I think that they've got up their sleeve that they think is going to be, aces is, well, we've got the state regulator for not doing what it's supposed to do, right? And maybe the collateral benefit of that by lodging a suit here is that we either get or shut down or moved, or we force them to do some sort of really expensive mitigation that no one else has to do. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's a realistic outcome. The most realistic outcome is the state works harder on trying to figure out how they're going to accommodate a problem that they've known they've had for years. How do you facilitate this without putting the state on the hook for putting these people out of business? Because you need them. You need them.
I'm gonna have you back, talk some more about this, and in closing, hey Mike, thanks a lot. Hang out back, and folks, we'll be back on Sunday with more live streams, possibly tomorrow. But thanks for watching, and subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube and bookmark OaklandNewsNow.com. I'll see you.